Welcome to the Republican Professor. We have with us today Dr. John Ferrer. Thanks for being here, John.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
John, I've never met you before besides on the phone, and here we are talking. So it's nice to put a face to a name.
And you likewise.
Are those CDs or what are those behind you? Are those books?
CDs, DVDs, Blu-ray. You might not be able to see. I've got a record collection down here.
I could see a record player. Cool.
Yeah. The other wall is supposed to look more academic with books, but it doesn't stage as well for the camera. So we turned it about 90 degrees and figured this would look more impressive and get people thinking and interested.
Yeah, well, it does actually kind of look like books, but it just shows that you are a man who's in touch with the world, and so you're ready to minister in a seasoned with the seasoning and salt because you know where people are. So
well, I'm
John,
a big fan of music myself, so I like
you're
to.
What?
I'm a big music fan myself. I tend to relate and interact with a lot in the world through music, and
I see a
so
guitar.
yeah, I tell people I'm not a particularly talented musician, but I can analogize most anything with either food, sports, or music,
Wow.
and that helps me kind of interact with the world. Is some good analogies like that. So music helps.
And you don't do that like in a fake way. That's just how you are. It's not like you're doing it as a ministry shtick or something.
Well, I'm more or less a loose combination of food, music, and sports. Just me. That's me in three pieces.
What kind of music do you like?
Um, it's somewhat eclectic. I've been this earlier today. I was listening to Eric Clapton Unplugged album. Apparently, there's this deluxe edition that has songs on it that I didn't know he performed in the Unplugged in that
Really?
famed Unplugged concert. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I was geeking out on that earlier today. But I've got a wide range. So probably the most common thing I go to is stuff that's good for studying. So with no lyrics, just because I happen to be reading. But when
Yeah.
not reading, I like a lot of folk, neo folk type of stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
I'm the same way. I don't like words when I'm trying to read because I get distracted.
yeah.
So when you say you have a record collection, are these new records you buy, like you know how they have new ones now, or are these like
Yeah.
the legit old ones?
Yes. And yes.
Okay.
I stumbled across I had a great yard sale find where a guy was just kind of clearing houses, getting rid of a whole bunch of stuff because he was going to take a long trip with his family to some new job. And there was this big blue container that had a lot of records in it. And I was, oh, cool, records. I'm flipping through it. And he said, I'll give you the whole bunch for $20. So I picked up like 50 classic rock albums and maybe 20 different CDs that were also in there for $20. And that was such a find for me. Before that, I had just a handful that I picked up at thrift stores, and I was playing them on my dinky little a new record player. But that put me in another level of music excitement. So I've been geeking out on records ever since. And yeah, probably my favorite right now is a Robert Plant album. He's got this new kind of a folksy vocalist piece that he's put out recently.
Huh.
Good. Yeah.
I don't know names, so I'm a total
Led Zeppelin.
idiot, man. I'm sorry.
Lead singer for
I
Led Zeppelin.
Okay. I've recognized the name. Okay, gotcha. Is he still
Yeah.
alive?
Yeah.
He's still alive?
He's still bringing it out. Yeah.
Gosh. Well, let me just share a story here so you know just how dumb I am with names, okay? Um,
Okay.
which one do I share? I have multiple. Uh, well, Yeah, it's getting a little bit off. I'll just share it real quick. So
Okay.
I was teaching at this place called Loyola Marymount at the time
Oh yeah, I know Loyola.
in LA. You know LA?
I know of Loyola Marymount. Yeah.
Okay. So this was back a while ago, and I had this student, Ben. His name was Ben. And after class, a bunch of students came to my office hours, including this kid Ben. And afterward, uh, Ben lingered behind. That day, I think I had been using some movies and stuff in class just to illustrate the concept of personal identity
Hmm.
and the soul and stuff like that, like personhood,
Yeah.
whether we're identical to our bodies. It's kind of broad. It was an undergrad class, lower level.
Yeah.
Philosophy of Human Nature is called, and I was using some films like Finding Nemo and Toy Story,
Yeah.
and I think those are interesting films to use because uh, it looks like these toys are people, and it looks like they don't have human bodies, and so
Yeah.
they don't have what is it that makes it a person kind of thing, and
Yeah.
same with Nemo, it's a fish.
Hmm.
So this kid Ben lingered, and I said, Ben, what do you want to do for your life? And he says, oh, I think I want to go into film. And I said, oh, really? Cool. And I said, what's the inspiration for that? And he said, probably my dad. I said, oh, cool. His name was Ben Lassiter. This is his kid's name. And I said, well, what does your dad do? Does he work in the films? And he said, yeah, yeah, yeah. I said, well, is there anything I would know? Is it like B level stuff, or is it like kind of low grade weird stuff? And he said, oh, no, it's Finding Nemo, Toy Story. He started listing these films that I said, oh, so what did he do on the films? Was he like a janitor or something? I didn't know.
Lights
He
or
was like, no, he was writer, director, producer. So I was like, really? I just totally don't know any names.
yeah.
So turned out the kid sitting there in my office hours was the inspiration for Andy in Toy Story,
Oh my goodness. Wow.
which I
That
didn't know at the time. I was like
Toy
just
Story was
talking to
just
him.
that was a revolutionary movie too.
Mhm.
I don't know that folks watching, Toy Story 12 or whatever they're on now really appreciate just how much that kind of surfaced the kid inside of all these adults.
Oh yeah.
Children's they took children's stories and
Yeah.
made it so that adults can't stay away from it.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I guess he told his parents that story and they sent me a bottle of wine for Christmas that year. That was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't believe it myself if I didn't see it myself right in front of my face.
Yeah.
But I have another story I'll share really quick. It's just kind of same school at Loyola Marymount years later, a while later, like almost a decade later.
Mhm.
I used to do this thing where I would have to bring the quizzes up. I would start doing quizzes right away, and then I would take roll and have them bring it up in alphabetical order so that the quizzes were in alphabetical order, and I
Oh,
learned
okay.
their names that way,
Smart.
kind of
Yeah.
like the military kind of. So I would do these little comments to learn their names, just stupid little jokes. Like this one kid, his name is John Neville. I said, any relation to Neville Chamberlain? And he would be like, who's Neville Chamberlain? And I'm like, oh.
Mm.
This one girl was named Whitney, and I said, any relation to Whitney Houston? And she goes, no. But for me, I remember there. So there's
Yeah,
this
yeah.
kid. I get to the J's, and this kid, last name Jackson, first name Michael, and he's this white kid, and he's wearing camo, and he looks like he's from Texas and like guns, and I
Mm.
was like, all right, moonwalk that quiz up to me, buddy, and I was just thinking, this poor kid whatever Jackson family out there, they have this kid and they name him Michael of all things, and I'm like, telling the these jokes like, hey, where's your shiny glove, and stuff like that,
Yeah.
each time just an innocuous little joke. Well,
Yeah.
halfway through the semester, one of the students in the class said, you know that's Michael Jackson's son, right? And
Oh,
so, and this is 2016, and a lot of stuff going on in 2016. Most of it has nothing to do with Michael Jackson, who was the most
yeah.
famous guy in the world when I was a kid, probably besides
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. But to me, I just thought these kids don't even know who Michael Jackson is, because the Pepsi commercials and all,
Yeah.
half the jokes I did, I don't think they even understood. Like I asked this kid, I said, now, do you know anybody named Billie Jean, or is that just a, anyway, is that your mom? Well, anyway, they didn't get it. They didn't get the joke. I think the kid did
Yeah.
that, but I later figured out he got all of them, and he
Yeah.
actually he was actually kind of happy about it. But
Yeah.
anyway, I just, the running joke was that everybody knew that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I just was like the total, almost like a boomer, not even a, I was just like a totally out to lunch professor
You're the
who didn't know
inspiration for the
anything.
okay boomer meme.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not even a boomer, which is funny.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and he would track me down in later semesters and come see me in office hours and talk stuff. Yeah,
Cool.
he wasn't upset about it at all. He was quite an interesting little kid. Well, he's not little kid, but quite an interesting guy. So
Yeah.
he didn't hold any grudges, and water off a duck's back.
Good.
Fortunately, my jokes were just innocuous, dumb,
Yeah.
innocent jokes, but yeah, so that gives you an idea. When I'm talking about popular culture, man, I if you say Robert Plant, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, if you're going to be much good at your job, you need to have your nose in a book,
Yeah,
many
I
hours,
think
many,
so.
many hours. And that's time you're not spending on TikTok or
Right.
whatever to
I
get.
do enjoy movies, though. I really do. I really enjoy
Well,
good films.
they're the novels of the modern era.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
are. Um, John, your wife is kind of famous now. She's got a cool book, cool ministry,
She's
and
cute too.
she's been on Hillary and Mama Bear Apologetics. Woohoo! Should give that a
Yeah.
shout out. Go check it out. But
Mhm.
you are quite highly educated yourself, right? You have a PhD.
Yes, I did a Master's of Divinity in Apologetics at Southern Evangelical Seminary. Got to study under folks like Norm Geisler
Mhm.
and just some different luminaries
Oh
in
yeah,
the apologetic world out
yeah.
there.
He's big
Then
time.
went to South. Oh yeah, then went to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. There I met Hillary and got married. And I say met. We That was the reason we moved there, is we wanted to be in the same city to try out this engagement thing and see if we're compatible. And I was going to seminary at the same time and
That's
did a,
awesome.
master's of theology and a PhD in philosophy of religion, minoring in ethics. From
Nice.
that was from about 2006 to 2014. Yeah.
Wow, 2006. So that was including the M.Div at Southern.
So Southern Evangelical, that was '02 to '06. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So 2006 to 2014. That was just the PhD. Eh,
PhD and THM.
Oh,
Yeah.
the THM.
So
Gotcha.
that,
Wow.
yeah.
Did you know
Yeah.
somebody named,
Now,
well, no, you wouldn't have
um,
known him. Who was there that you studied philosophy with at Southwestern? Anybody?
Southwestern. Gosh, it's weird because during my time there, they were revamping the department. They were dumping a lot of the professors that I studied under.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and even my advisor, he came down with lung cancer like a year into my time with him,
Oh,
and he managed to fight through and hold on till I finished my PhD. But like 6 months later, he passed away, and I think that's the main reason they didn't
mm,
fire him or move him somewhere else, is because I mean, you don't want to be the one who fires the cancer patient. I mean, you're just a villain if you do that.
mhm.
Um,
They didn't like the program or they didn't like him?
Well, it was probably administrative, school direction, visionary type of things going on at the time, because their prior president, Paige Patterson, he kind of he's bigger than a person, so to speak. He represents a lot of the conservative restoration of the seminary world at the time.
Was this at
And
Southwestern, did you say?
Southwest
Okay.
Southwestern.
Fort Worth.
Yeah, in Fort Worth, Texas. Yeah. And he didn't, to my knowledge, and from personal interaction with him, he didn't have any real vision for apologetics. And so that aspect of ethics and philosophy wasn't terribly interesting to him. He saw everything as subordinate to evangelizing the lost and developing a stronger pulpit, so better preaching. Those
Mm,
seem to be the two strengths that he had, that he thought the church should all have, and that should be everyone's focus. And my background and my experience, I'm kind of an atheist magnet.
mm,
Uh, and so I end up talking with all these people that were burnt over by hyper fundamentalists
mm,
who kept everything on the bottom shelf
mm.
and oversimplified and treated all questions like you shouldn't doubt. Doubt makes baby Jesus cry. And those kinds of thinkers, I would end up with them trying to converse with them, saying, that's not all Christians are like that. Not all the churches like that. We
Okay.
actually have a very rich intellectual history, but as far as they know, we don't, because they've
Right.
never seen it. And so,
Wow.
without going into too much there, they've changed presidents since then, and I really can't speak for what the culture is like at Southwestern now, because
Okay.
I was last there in 2014, so that was what, 6, 7, 8 years ago,
Yeah,
and a lot can happen in that time in a
sure.
seminary.
What is it like doing, I mean, I think if people don't know what an M.Div is, it's a Master of Divinity, and it's designed for basically someone who wants to be a minister full
Yeah.
time, right?
Yep.
Like on a church staff.
Yes.
And then, so that's like a professional degree, kind of like a JD is at law school or an MD.
Mhm.
The THM and beyond, maybe that's less familiar with people. I know what a THM is, but what
Okay.
what was it like getting a THM?
So, to kind of frame this, when I started at Southern Evangelical Seminary in '02, it was '02, yeah.
Mhm.
At the time, I thought I was going to go into full-time local church ministry, like some pastorate position. That was my belief. I knew I was interested in apologetics and intellectual stuff, but I'd felt a ministry calling in my life, and I thought that was where I was going to go. And I trusted that God had a way that all this would dovetail just fine. So I wasn't worried about, oh, well, are you going into school or are you going into church? Which is it? I figured, just be faithful with what you do know, and it'll work out.
Mhm.
So I went to Southern Evangelical, did a ministry training degree at M.Div. And when I was looking at grad schools beyond that to go to PhD work, it was because in my time at Southern Evangelical, I realized so many different people with the ministry calling want to go into local church ministry, or they want to go into international missions. and they're still tending to think in terms of local church ministry, but they're not necessarily thinking of how do we redeem the university.
Mm.
Like the university culture is in many ways churning out so much hostility and bile and problems for the church, when that's exactly opposite of what the university can and should be. The university could, in theory, be its most redeemed when it's also the closest tied to truth. As I'm sure you're well aware, if you've been at Loyola, the university system at its core was a gift of the church to the world. It was something that could not have existed if not for the affluence and curiosity and the reverence that stemmed from the church in the Middle Ages. So the university has been many great things. Now, I don't want to go too far askew here, but my passion for redeeming academia was growing and growing while I was at Southern Evangelical. So by the time I was graduating, I was saying, I need to get a PhD and I need to prep for academic focused ministry, even if it doesn't mean I'm going to be in a church. So I went to Southwestern, but at the time I missed their deadline for PhD admissions. I had been advised wrong by several people on the phone.
Oh.
And so the only thing I could apply for in July was Th.M, Master of Theology. But I found,
which is one step up from the M.Div, just for people to know. It's not the same as the M.Div, it's one up.
An M.Div is about a 3-year degree. An M.A. is about a 2-year graduate degree. An M.Div is about a 3-year degree. And a Th.M is like a 4th year on top of it.
Yeah.
And so I did that because I knew most of the classes would transfer into my PhD work. So kill two birds with one stone, why not? So that's how I ended up in Th.M work. It's because I was working towards a research degree in philosophy and ethics.
Did you do comprehensive exams and a dissertation in the Th.M or a thesis?
Yep. I had a reading list to chew through, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. I don't know how involved the reading list is for other schools, because it's my understanding that seminaries might actually have to overcompensate with that, because there's kind of gamesmanship in academia, and seminary is considered less than, say, a Notre Dame or one of these established, might have a Christian history or a Catholic Christian history specifically. But if it's a seminary, it's not necessarily treated with the same respect as one of these big name schools, a Boston College or NYU or a Notre Dame. And that's not even talking about Ivy League. Of course, Ivy League gets the respect in academia. But to make up for it, my reading list was, I believe, 15 pages long. So that's a list of all the books that I had to read, was 15 pages long. And it ate my lunch. That was hard work. Yeah.
How long were the exams for that? Do you recall?
I think we were able to get it done in 2 days. I think it ended up being somewhere, but oh gosh.
That's a lot of material to know.
Well, it's not like we got tested on all of it, but we could get questions on any one of those,
what were the topics? Was it broken down by topic?
I'd have to go look, but they basically
was there a
tried
Greek
to cover.
portion? Was there a Hebrew Greek portion?
Well, okay, so for my M.Div, I had comprehensive exams where I had to take essay style questions, specifically tutored with Norm Geisler, and that had to cover everything that he considered valid in survey level to apologetics. Like all the major objections I had to be conversant in, and all the students did. And we had to prove it with oh gosh, like 100 question, 50 some question quiz test where you had essay style answers to it. So that was the M.Div. The Th.M.
That's not normal for an M.Div. That's high level academic stuff. Yeah.
I feel like with no disrespect intended towards Southwestern, because it wasn't aiming at apologetics specifically at the
Right.
time. But with no disrespect intended to them, I felt like the education I got at Southern Evangelical was unique and
Mm.
empowering beyond anything I could have gotten at another evangelical seminary, like Orthodox Evangelical Seminary in America. I think SES was.
Did you take Greek and Hebrew at your M.Div level?
Yeah, I took Greek and Hebrew. I also had Latin and intermediate logic. That was
Ooh.
language. So I had 4 languages that I ended up studying en route
Lat
to my PhD.
Okay,
I'm
hold
not
on.
good at any of
Latin,
them all.
Hebrew, Greek. What was the fourth?
Intermediate logic.
As a language?
Yeah. If you've read much in analytic philosophy, you understand it's if you, for people who aren't.
You're talking about symbolic logic, right?
Yeah, but that next step where you're gonna be covering um X is necessary and not necessary, and
Modal
you're
logic.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
symbolic logic's fine, but we had to go beyond that to some of the more controversial stuff.
Okay.
um
All right.
I can't say that I was that good at it. I am far more excited and interested in informal logic, logical fallacies, and the rhetorical side of it.
Yeah. Okay. So you had Latin, Hebrew, and Greek as natural languages. What was Latin like? Was that fun? I never got to take it.
It was a language.
Okay.
If I were better at languages, I think I could have gotten more out of it. I think I was able to get good grades. I was able to do what was assigned to me. But one thing I did learn in the course of my language studies is that it's not very intuitive to me. And I don't have any unique or natural gifting in it. I've known people that they're passionate about it and they're pretty good at it. They don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to work hard to be good at it. They can work hard to be great at it, but they're already good at it. Me, I had to work hard at it just to be adequate.
Did you
And
take church history?
yeah,
Okay.
I had some church history.
So what
Um,
kind of coursework did you have at the Th.M level that you didn't have at the M.Div? Do you recall that?
well, I had to go into more. I had to broaden my philosophy and my ethics because
Okay.
that was my major and minor. So even
Gotcha.
though I had an introduction to philosophy or history of philosophy, um, and, in 2 courses at Southern Evangelical, and then I had um, 1 or 2 logic classes, and I had some hermeneutics classes as electives. I think I took 2, maybe 3 courses in hermeneutics, and that was my philosophy, but or philosophy training at the M.Div level. But as you're well aware, philosophy isn't just a field of knowledge; it's also a it's a skill, it's a disposition that you
Yeah.
cultivate, and
It's an
I think
approach. Yeah.
yeah, and that's more what I picked up. I think I got a robust theological and philosophical training to where I could kind of compare them against each other and kind of critique each other from both of those perspectives. And
Hmm.
then you could set both of those beside, say, a scientific perspective and say, okay, all of these different means of knowing are valid and invalid in their different respective ways. Um,
Gotcha.
and they should all be able to inform each other, but you got a lot of arrogant guys often trying to compete to see, oh, you guys don't know anything. My team's way better than your team, and I'm not interested in that kind of competition.
Hmm. So what did you do when you got to your PhD program, did you have more comprehensive exams and then a dissertation after that?
Yeah,
What did you write your dissertation on for your PhD?
body ethics. It was a continuation on my Th.M,
Okay.
which I did. Oh gosh, I can't remember the length. Maybe 75 pages, 100 pages on um, body ethics. So take bioethics, but instead of applying it to life or death bio issues, apply it to the body, things related to um, we could say the ethical implications regarding one's body.
Gotcha.
So I think it's a really interesting field of study, but I think at the time I was just going through a lot with Hillary's health issues and just stress and not being able to pay the bills and different things. So where I was glad to be done with it. And once I finished that dissertation, I didn't really want to look at it for years. But looking back on it now, I realized that that really is a very fruitful subject area, because we could deal with everything from the ethics of um, plastic surgery, performance enhancing drugs, tattooing and scarification, even trivial things, trivial depending on how far out you trace the implications. Things like organic foods,
Mhm.
and cosmetics. All of
Yeah.
these things bear upon the body, but
Right.
the more you step back and retain a big picture perspective on things, you see it all has huge ramifications.
Yeah.
When you just pull on that little string, it's amazing what starts to come undone somewhere else.
Yeah. Big time. Um, so you basically studied the application of philosophy and theology to contemporary cultural issues related to right and wrong that
Yeah,
people in the church and people in the culture will face.
yeah. And
Um,
right now, I see I see a prime opportunity for body ethics regarding a lot of the current chaos we're seeing.
Mhm.
People who have no concrete sense of identity. It's as if
Mm.
what's going on in your subjective experience right now is the totality of everything you are, and yet biblically and just practically speaking, um, that's such an untethered,
Mm.
ideologically mystical view that you're just bound to come crashing into reality sooner or later, and it's going to be a devastating fall. To quote a a Blue Oyster Cult song on this, history shows again and again how nature points out the folly of man. Now that was about Godzilla. That's the chorus line,
Oh,
but
okay.
we see the same thing now where people are trying to say, oh, biology isn't destiny. Well, it might not be destiny, but it's definitely something. And if you think that you can reinvent your gender because of your feelings, then you're fighting a losing battle. Not only will you not win, but you're going to lose a lot of what you had in the struggle.
Mm. I guess it would be a little odd if I asked you what your gender was right now.
I identify as male. But who knows? Who knows what tomorrow may hold? Yeah.
Wow. I never thought we'd be in a position like this, John, where my I could ask my students who maybe tell me about their father, what gender was your father? And they stop for a second and wonder what doesn't make sense about this. um, well, what did you end up doing after your PhD then?
So in 2014, I finished my PhD, but at the time I had been teaching at Pantego Christian Academy, also dual credit status with Texas Wesleyan University. I was teaching ethics, world religions, um,
What's it called
as
again?
well. Um, the school,
Yeah,
Texas Wesleyan University,
the other one, the
um,
academy.
Pantego,
Uh-huh.
Pantego Christian Academy.
Oh, okay. Is that a college?
It's a high school,
Oh, okay.
and
High
that's in
school.
Arlington, Texas. So I would commute about 45 minutes to school every day, and if I had to be at Southwestern, I'd have to drive about an hour there because we lived in Dallas at the time.
Oh.
So I did that up through 2015, and that summer, I took a job with Bill Dembski, who at the time If you know William Dembski.
I don't know him personally, but I've
Okay,
heard of
well,
him.
yeah, he's well known for intelligent design theory. He's one of the big wigs in
Yeah,
advancing that
right.
hypothesis.
Yeah.
So he had gotten involved in an education website called thebestschools.org, and he wanted to hire some writers to fill it with content, populate the site, and make it something that could draw more traffic. He was my teacher for one class at Southwestern, and he invited me along to be part of this crazy wild experiment in the marketplace. And
That's awesome.
that lasts about 3 years.
Hmm.
Great experience. It brought us to Pella, Iowa, where he was based at the time, and this is where we live now. But 3 years later, he sold the company for a pretty penny, and um, most all of the conservatives on staff were laid off within 3 months. Uh, not
He sold it to a bunch of libs.
well, he sold it to folks that have a bigger establishment in the education world, and
Oh,
to sales and marketing and um, commerce, even communication in the education world is often going to be dictated by trends to the left. Eh, Especially in the humanities, and a lot of what we did cover the humanities. Um, I don't want to rule out or overgeneralize, but a lot of the key players and influencers that are determining what's allowed, what's polite society allowing in academia, at
mhm,
least in the humanities, a lot of those decisions are dictated by politically leftward trends,
mhm.
and that's possibly one of the reasons why it's been um, a very uphill battle to try to make a dent in academia with my seminary background and my conservative politics. But that said, there's 100 other things that we could point to, because it's just a tough field. You have to do really good work. You have to. Um, there's just not a whole lot of jobs for all the folks coming up with PhDs, and the 100 or so new jobs that will open up in philosophy of religion in the next year. So it's a competitive market. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I needed to be as available as I could to help out with Hillary. And so I think it's one of those weird indirect ways that God provided.
Yeah. Okay. So you moved to Iowa to
Yep.
be to work with Bill,
Yep.
and then Bill moved on.
Yep.
Um, and what did you do after that?
So we're in Pella in the middle of the school year. It was January at the time. And I started looking around for jobs. I was trying to prioritize teaching jobs, but not that many schools are hiring in January. They're hiring in, getting closer to the summer. They're not hiring in January. So there weren't any teaching jobs that were really presenting themselves very well. So, long story short, by the end of that year, I was working at Pella Corporation. Pella Doors and Windows.
Yeah.
They're in Pella, Iowa, and I was working at the plant.
Okay.
And by that time, Hillary's ministry was starting to take off. So there would still be times where I'd have to ask off for Friday so that I could travel with her and she could do some speaking engagements. So it worked well for that, but it was wearing me out because I can handle the factory work, but
Hmm.
it's not my passion. It wasn't what I was trained for. I've since transitioned into um, a woodworking job where I'm at now, and it allows me even more flexibility. And it's a smaller environment, and I really like the people that are there. We can have theological conversations and have Christian music playing, and I can have some podcast playing in the background. So there's a little bit I'm learning, a little bit I'm chewing on while I'm, sanding a door for the fourth time. I can be
Wow.
learning a little bit, keeping culture stuff. So it's offered a lot of the flexibility that I need at this stage for the sake of making sure Hillary's taken care of. But God provides, and if I'm too proud to do a blue collar job, then that means I'm just too proud. Um, Jesus was a carpenter, so I'm definitely not above it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
When you grew up, did you grow up in a blue collar family, or did you grow up
Yeah,
with something
yeah.
else?
My dad's was a teacher. My mom a nurse. They're both retired now. But interestingly, even though we were raised in the church, my parents are both committed Christians. My brother is an atheist. And I think a lot of what drew me into apologetics, worldview training, the intellectual life was that I couldn't take for granted my Christian faith. There
Yeah.
were questions and encounters that I would have on a regular basis with folks, with someone I cared about, someone I'm related to, who didn't agree with me on something that was central to my worldview. And so I never had that leisure of that bubble experience where you just kind of assume that everybody who's anybody is Christian, because everybody I know is Christian, or at least they claim to be, or at least they play the part well enough. All my friends are at church or at my Christian school or in my Christian family. So there was a little pinprick to that balloon. So it
Yeah.
was never going to hold air. That myth just didn't work on me, and
Yeah.
yet I knew plenty of people that up into adulthood still kind of thought that way. And a lot of my experience in apologetics trying to promote a more intelligent Christian faith, a lot of it's been trying to put a fire under people's seats because they're just not that urgent. They're not that alert to this
Yeah.
whole dimension that's going on right in front of our faces, because they tend to think that, oh yeah, they're still kind of shaped in their values and expectations according to all my friends are Christian. I go to church. I'm taken care of. We're good. Why are
Yeah.
you getting so hot? Why are you getting so excited about this? No
Right.
biggie.
Wow. Where did you grow up?
South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Yeah, just south of the border. So when I went to Southern Evangelical Seminary, I was driving about 20 minutes into Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where'd you go to college?
Charleston Southern University.
And let me
And
guess, that's in Charleston.
yeah, that's in
Okay.
Charleston, South Carolina, not West Virginia. Yeah.
It's a nice town.
Yeah. How about you? Where'd you go to school?
I went to Wayland Baptist University in Hawaii, which is
Oh,
a Southern
why?
Baptist school. It's a Southern Baptist school there and well, it's on Oahu.
No
So,
kidding. Charleston Southern Baptist too.
pardon?
I went to a Southern Baptist college.
Is that what
CSU
that
was
is?
Mhm.
Charleston? What's it called? Charleston? What is it?
Charleston
Charles.
Southern University. They're in
That's a
the
Baptist college, really?
yeah. They
Hmm.
used to be Baptist College of Charleston.
Oh, okay. How far away is that from from that military school?
From the Citadel, 30
Yeah, there you
minutes.
go. 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've walked around the Citadel before. I haven't.
Yeah.
That's a nice little area. I like that area.
It's a good
It's
place to settle in and stay.
what did you major in college?
I double majored in religion, which is
Mhm,
kind of theology degree,
mhm.
and uh, communication minor, not minor, communication emphasis in theater, and I minored in sociology.
Oh, cool. Did you feel like you got a good education there?
Reasonably well, but I went there primarily for ministry training. As I said before, I thought I was going into seminary to prepare for local church pastor work. So I was at the time I was aiming more for having the skills and the wherewithal to be able to hold my own in a pulpit and doing pastoral care
Yeah.
and doing different elements. So I think I got the kind of ministry training that I went in for, but I wasn't going there for philosophy. I wasn't going there
Okay.
for apologetics. I didn't really expect any of that to really become driving passions of mine. But by the time I graduated college, I knew apologetics needs to be a big part of whatever I'm doing. And so when
Was
I went to Southern Evangelical, even though I thought I was going to go to a local church pastorate, I was starting to aim
yeah.
more specifically towards apologetics by that time.
And Geisler's school is that in South Carolina too?
No, that one's in it's Matthews, North Carolina, but it's right in the Charlotte area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, was it your
A lot from
brother's
the Carolinas
atheism?
think they're the same. Yeah.
Was it your brother's atheism that was the driving force for you to get on board with apologetics and philosophy? Or was that just you noticing that philosophy is more important than you realized later?
Well, to be honest, I didn't have enough exposure to philosophy or positive experiences with it before SES,
Okay.
to where I could have a positive sense of what philosophy is. It wasn't until I got to SES,
Gotcha.
and by that time I was interested in apologetics through Josh McDowell, more than a carpenter.
Yep.
And some of the evidential apologetics and just a
Right.
little bit of arguments for God, that
Mhm.
line of apologetics. And so um, when I got to SES, I primarily thought of apologetics as counter cult ministries. We're trying to prove to folks the resurrection really happened. The Jesus of the Bible is the true one, not these other fake Jesuses. And that's what I thought apologetics was. And that's definitely a big part of it.
Yeah,
But
it is.
but but the more we dug into it, the more I realized we got to get into this meta level. We have to get underneath all of these assumptions and preconceptions people have that are
Yeah.
effectively their kind of awnings covering
Yeah.
the well of the wellspring of their heart. And so if you're going to
Mm.
get down there with some Jesus, you got to get underneath all of these blockades in the way. And that's in many ways what apologetics does when it dignifies philosophy. It allows you to get to the meta level questions of how do we know, what does it mean to know, what do we mean by existence, and
Right.
then
Yeah.
and these are all priors for a good theology too. And it can keep. I can often tell people who have a theology training without any of the reinforcement from philosophy,
Mm.
because they tend to say things that philosophers are like, differently. Yeah.
Can you give an example of that? So, okay, so someone's maybe doesn't know quite what you're talking about. Maybe they're something to hang
I'm
on to.
trying to think of a good example. Um,
If you think of one, that's fine. But
I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you one if it comes to me. I do know a lot of worship music gets to me that way because I'll hear, as a philosopher, one of those skills you pick up whether you want it or not is you can hear what people mean and what they say and recognize when they're different things.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot of that in worship music where you know what they're trying to say,
Yeah.
but you also know what they said.
Yeah.
And if you're charitable, you'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes if they're implicitly teaching theology and they still have these squishy terms that can communicate two or three different
Yeah.
things, then you don't quite know what theology you're actually coaching people into.
Very good.
And even though, I know worship music isn't teaching in a formal, strict, didactic sense, but it's still kind of coaching, encouraging, and people still get a lot of their theology through music.
No, I could make the same point about law, which is my area. I did my PhD in constitutional law, and you got to pay really close attention to the words that are used because
Yes.
sometimes the meaning that's given at a time
Mm.
doesn't, well, what I should say is the intention, what someone's trying to say and what they actually say are not the same thing. And it's not obvious right away. It's not
Yeah.
obvious for until later.
Yeah.
Then when another generation comes and says, oh, look what the law says. Well, look at
Yeah.
this. Look at what we can do.
There's a
And
lot of overlap
or what we
between
can't do.
those fields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean,
Between
I could give you tons of
philosophy.
examples of that. I don't want to, go too crazy, but it's I'll give you one just example. When I was going through Wayland Baptist University, God bless Wayland, I was having a government class there on Kaneohe Marine Corps Station, there on the windward side of the island. And I had a great teacher who was a retired, I think E8 or E9 enlisted guy who got his graduate training in government. Well, anyway, he was using a standard textbook at the time, and we came to the part on the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment was it was such a small section, and just I read that and I totally cringe because it was just almost basically ignored. But it was even worse than being ignored, because at least if it was ignored, you could have said, they just kind of skipped over it. But there was erroneous stuff in there. And it was a really superficial reading of the text of the Second Amendment, and hardly any history context at all.
Yeah.
And this was in the 90s. So, this is it was like you could just tell the bias of the person writing this,
Yep.
And I'll say, just because I teach this stuff now, I teach the Second Amendment now. I'm teaching the American founding at Azusa Pacific this semester, and so I teach constitutional law, and I'm having them read Stephen Holbrook's The Founder's Second Amendment, which came out in 2008. Okay, so those kind of materials weren't very common back when I was going through, but the point remains that the stuff was there. I mean, you could all you had to do is put it together. It was obvious. And one of the questions that is it an individual right, or is it a community, kind of almost a government right?
Yeah.
It's in the Second Amendment, and the wording of the Second Amendment is a little odd. And when you're reading the Bill of Rights, it just stands out as a little odd, because there's there's two clauses. They're both dependent clauses, and then there's an independent clause. So what do you do with that? Well-regulated militia, comma. That's not a complete sentence. It's just this dependent clause, being necessary for the security of a free state, comma. That's a dependent clause too. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is a complete sentence. So what do? You have a complete sentence, you have an independent clause, but it's got these two dependent clauses in the front. And when they wrote the Second Amendment, it's kind of like, well, what are you doing? It's not very clear. They could have said it differently. They could have said it a lot more clearly. But it just goes to show you that I think that everybody that read it originally felt like it was perfectly clear. What we're trying to say. I mean, it's just the same people that are doing the worship music, and this theology isn't really drilled down very carefully. And it's because they were like, what we just went through with the British, and what the kind of stuff they were just trying to pull on us. So you what we're well, you fast forward and it's 1990 something in Hawaii and Wayland Baptist, and they act like they don't know what you're talking about. And sometimes if there's enough there to be able to figure it out. But
if you are a good and teachable student of history, that will in many ways restrict what live political options are available for you to believe. Like what political policy options can you buy into? If you've been a student of history, you're going to rule this stuff out and this stuff out. And that really narrows down what you consider to be viable avenues going forward that are worth your vote, that are worth your support. Because there's a lot to be learned from the mistakes of the past.
Mhm.
I'm a youngest. I'm the baby of the family. I have an older brother and an older sister.
Hmm.
And in some ways, I think I've got a low grade analogy with that because I had the leisure of learning from their mistakes. They
Yeah.
went before me.
Yeah.
And if I'm observant, I can save a lot of heartache going forward because they did this and got punished, or they did that and it came back to haunt them. And so I'm not going to do that. Or if
Yeah.
they did it this way and it saved them time and made friends, okay,
Mm.
well, I'll do that.
Well, and yeah, like when you read church history, you can see the kind of things that people are arguing about. And sometimes, a lot of the times, it is unclarity in the language, like whether it's the biblical language or whether it's some of the what to include in what creed, or
Mhm.
what the philosophical implications are of something. It's the same
Yeah,
thing. And it's hard. And so it's a good skill to have, to try to be as clear as possible, try to have what you mean to say to be the same thing
yeah,
as what you actually said.
yeah,
And and most people are not paying attention to that.
yeah.
So for that reason alone, I salute you for having that on your radar. Now, you care a lot about the issues of the body. What would you say is the number one or number two, a top priority for you as far as one of these controversial issues that goes on right now? Anything pressing?
Well, a lot of the queering efforts trying to make male and female ambiguous.
Okay.
Um, I see this as an insidious um, ideology that does not have children's best interests in mind and does not have the best interests of family or parents in mind. And ultimately, I see it as a deeply toxic um, worldview, but potentially growing into or becoming its own worldview that could have devastating ramifications for society. Now, I need to qualify that because I don't want to make it out to be more than it is. Because I think at some level, a lot of the people that are playing along with this don't really think it's a good idea, but they're acting in their own best interest because it seems to be fashionable among people who make big decisions. You get canceled if you say that women are adult human females, or you lose some lobbying support from this demographic or from this group if you say what you know.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean people don't know it. It just means conversation is chilled on that matter because people are scared to speak out. It's what Rod Dreher calls soft totalitarianism. It's not hard totalitarianism. It's not an Orwellian landscape we're looking at that's going to radically restrict what you're allowed to say and do. But it is a soft totalitarianism in the sense that you can get canceled and lose a lot of privilege and access in society unless you play the game, unless you uh, refuse to acknowledge that men can't be women and women can't be men. They could be mutilated men and feel and think that they feel like a woman, but that doesn't mean that any man has ever once known what it feels like to be a woman. Philosophically, and the idea of identity and personhood, um, that doesn't hold water. I
Hmm.
had a professor made it. He told the story in class. He said he was bebopping along to this Tom Petty song while he was driving into work, and it said, "You don't know how it feels to be me." And of course, this philosophy professor's like, "How would you know that? How do you know that you don't know how it feels to be me? For all we know, yours and my experience of self could be identical, but since I can't access yours and you can't access mine, we can't compare them." So, and that's how philosophers are. So,
Right.
there's good and bad. But that does point to a more more basic problem of how can any man know what it feels like to have the body and physiology and psychology that is scientifically demonstrable of adult human females. Whatever you want to call that, that's still an adult human female. And there's still plenty of polling and demographic evidence and biology and history. And for a man to say he knows what that feels like, how do you know you just don't feel weird and you think that's what women feel like?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just untenable, not to mention it has tremendous ramifications for our expectations for personal responsibilities to the world, procreation, ability to be mature enough to socially and emotionally develop so that you're not the sin of the world, you're not a narcissist, but you actually are a selfless, giving, charitable person who lives more for other people than for yourself. So you have the potential to be a good parent. You know, those are the kinds of things that it takes for society to be solvent.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got whole generations that are taught to think and view the world in terms of radical individualism, and to replace calm, dispassionate judgment with emotivism and emotionalism, as if something can't be true unless you have a feeling about it, and something can't be false if you feel good about it. That's a terrible epistemology. It doesn't work at all. Not to mention it handicaps you to being immature and unfit for marriage or family. But you can see how some of the implications for gender confusion and some of the constellation of issues that we're seeing happening in elementary school now, those that could really come back to haunt us in short order as we start seeing, for example, hormone blockers and puberty blockers that they say are reversible, yet they don't have the long-term studies to prove it. How come they don't have the long-term studies to prove it? Well, because it's unethical to do that. And so you can't do the studies on children to prove it, because it wouldn't be allowed according to basic bioethics. And so why would it be unethical? Because it's not purely reversible, and they have reason to think that it's or at least they have reason to think that it's not entirely reversible.
Wow.
So all this sense that we can just close that door once we open it, we can confuse people about gender. We can confuse them about just what kind of reverence we need to have about sexuality going forward, and be chaste and modest so that we don't have this long sexual past by the time we get married. All of these things revolving around gender and sexuality, folks are trying to rewrite the script and think that it's still going to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is you don't get to stay the author of that script. Eventually, some reality starts taking the pen from you and writes the ending to it, and it's not. There's no guarantee that it's going to be a happy ending. But yeah,
what about the topic?
Things, by the way.
What
Sorry.
about the topic of abortion? You care about that too?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that issue. Pretty concerned for it. So when I taught,
I'm gonna link what you just said with this current topic of abortion, and I'm gonna pretend to be what I'm not, which is a Democrat, and I'm gonna say to you, John, you're a man. You cannot have a view about abortion. You cannot have a view about abortion. It's funny, the Democrats don't seem to connect these two things very well. They pretend not to know what a woman is on the one hand, and then they say you have to be a woman to have a view about abortion unless you support it. Then you can have a view about it. So what do you say about that? And what's your concern about abortion? Are you for it? You're pro-choice?
Oh, I'm against it. Elective abortion. Usually what people mean. So here on out, unless I say otherwise, I'm talking about elective abortion, not therapeutic abortion, like to save the life of the mother or something like that. So in elective abortion, if it is a crime against humanity, and I think there's a more than reasonable argument that it is, then by right of being a human, I have as much cause as anyone concerned for justice has to speak out against it. Now, the short answer to this, Now, there's a whole case that could be made to that. I don't think it'd be wise to try to go into all of that right now. But the short answer is, do I have to be Black to oppose racism? Do I have to be a woman to oppose sexism? Do I have to be disabled to oppose ableism? No, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And by right of being a human, I have a right to speak out against injustice against my fellow human beings. I don't have to dive into the whole personhood argument to get there. I just need to point out that if it's wrong, then I can say that and be correct.
Right.
Truth, it doesn't have a gender. Truth doesn't have a race. Truth just is what it is. And as long as we're lining up with truth, then we're in a very powerful position. Might be very unpopular, but we have the leverage of reality to push against that can challenge anything that pits itself as a compelling lie.
So truth isn't relative.
No. Short answer, no. There's
What's the
there's
long
a
answer?
more sophisticated answer we could give that tries to parse out relative aspects of truth, and then there are truths that you speak that the reference point, the objective reference point, is a sliding scale of some sort, and in a sense, it's objective relative. I don't think you necessarily want to go into all of that, but truth is objective. We both can access at least some facts of reality, regardless of what angle we're coming at it, and still have some degree of common access to it. And in that sense, it's a object that you and I can interact with. It's not just a subject that's private to the subject, the subjective,
Right.
or just relative to an individual perspective.
Right.
Perspectivism has some merit to add to the conversation, so we don't become too clunky and simplistic. But there's still objective truth. Like 2 + 2 = 4, no matter what your race or color or politics are.
Do you worry that the folks over at that blue collar thing that you're working at, the Pella Corp, are going to watch this and say, "Hey, you don't have a job here anymore, you pro-life." Beep, beep, beep. Are you worried about censorship in a blue collar job like that?
Some, not terribly.
Okay. And why is
Depending
it
on
in
the
white
blue-collar
collar
job.
jobs? There's more censorship in white collar jobs, aren't there?
The reason I would be less concerned about it in your typical blue collar job is at least twofold. One, if you're on an assembly line like I was, you don't have time to do all of that other gabbing where you're saying stuff that'll get you in trouble. You have to produce a new window every 90 seconds or every 2 minutes. You have to do it. So you have to go fast. So you don't quite have the same leisure. But number two, there's a certain, you might say, pragmatic filter for ideas that at a blue collar level, it's getting routinely tested, and it doesn't quite touch ground. It doesn't quite translate for real people who have real issues and they need to pay the bills. And all the theory and ideology that can look great on paper, if it doesn't translate into the real world, then it's not compelling to them. So there's a lot that goes on that is kind of fashionable dinner conversation for white collar and Ivy League and high society. It could be fashionable conversation in that setting, but blue collar people are like, okay, does it work?
Mhm. Right.
What does this mean? What are the practical implications? Now, pragmatics aren't generally a verifier. They don't make a thing true, but they can show a thing false if it wasn't true in the first place. But
Yeah.
something could be practical and still be a lie. I
Okay.
illustrate for people. Suppose I told you that my car is run by gerbils on wheels. Like if I were to lift up the hood, and I never do because they like their privacy. Those gerbils on wheels, they run really fast, and if I crank the
They're obviously
engine,
pretty powerful too.
yeah, all I have to do is regularly feed them gasoline whenever it gets down to empty, and I need to bathe them every 3 to 5,000 miles in motor oil, and they're happy. Now, that's a functional lie. I get my oil change, I keep up with my gas, and the car drives. That'll get me a long way. Does that mean my car's actually filled with hamsters on a wheel? No. Lies can work and still be lies. Truth must work at minimum. It, so that's kind of how pragmatics work. You can show a set of ideas such as men can be women. You can show them faults by practical application. But if you just stay in the theoretical, if you're just trapped in the classroom and you never have to see what this looks like in the real world, then there's a lot of bad ideas that you can be swayed into.
Yeah. Well, how do you show that men can't be women though, practically? How does that work?
Show me a biological male. Well, there's a couple ways to approach it. I
Mhm.
would probably ask the individual person what context or in what sense do they mean this? Are they
Mhm.
talking about sports? That's one of the easier ways to test it. There's a, I forget the website, but you can go see the top high school male performers and their numbers compared to Olympic athlete females. And high school males would still dominate in most track and field sports compared to women.
Hmm.
And that's women who have been training for, decades to be the best in their field. And that's because physiologically it's well known, it's well demonstrated. You can look it up, challenge me on all of this, but men on average have have more muscle mass, have thick tensor bone density, have more of a load bearing posture and frame. They're able to regenerate muscle and have greater agility and fast twitch muscle fibers. All of those things are given to men. Now, there's never been a single biological male, X, Y, X, X, the talking about at a genetic level, there's never been a biological male to birth a baby. Women can have this other strength that men don't have. Men have a strength that women, at least on average, don't have. And so the physiology of it is pretty concrete, tangible. Now it gets a little more tricky if they're starting to talk about, say, relational dynamics,
Mhm.
emotions and relationships and social dynamics, but it's not impossible because you could still do polling data and find that overwhelmingly women prefer a man who's bigger and stronger than them. Most women don't want a man who is shorter and less physically fit and less physically able than them.
Well,
Now,
let me push back on a little bit because
okay,
when we talk about what's average, it might be missing the point here because we're talking
okay,
about individuals that are almost by definition not falling in the mainstream, right?
yeah,
So we're talking about people that are maybe exceptions to the rules, not the rule themselves. And
okay.
so what would you say about that? Like,
Well, if you were to compartmentalize the social, emotional, relational dynamics from the biology and physiology dynamics, if you say, okay, we're keeping these separate,
right,
I'm not talking about biology, I'm talking about social
right,
stuff.
right,
I'd say, why are you separating them? What gives you the right to treat these like they're not related?
right,
They're aspects within the same reality where we both still have to use the same taxis, we both have to use the same elevator. It's not like we got to keep all of these things separate. The same reality encompasses both, and in many ways those social, emotional, relational, psychological differences are uh, very sensible outworkings of those physiological, biological differences. I'm reading a book right now, critiquing the sexual revolution. It's by a political liberal, possibly someone who even identifies as progressive. She's pro-choice, and she's pointing out how um, the evolutionary account for women and men as they approach sex and relationships. just being honest about what we know from interviews and polling data and stuff like that, the sexual revolution overwhelmingly did a great disservice to women by treating a typically masculine, stereotypically masculine approach to sex like that's going to be women's best access to liberation. So women basically have to conform to a masculine norm if they want to be free, if they want to be liberated women. But why is a masculine, stereotypically masculine, or what she calls sociosexual? It's there. There's an insider term for someone who likes a lot of variety in their sexual relationships. So multiple partners, not longstanding, not deeply invested.
Polyamorous.
Well, that's one something that plays out. But think the stereotypical frat boy, the guy who just wants to have a lot of hookups. That's something that is more common in men and less common in women.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense if men aren't the ones who have to deal with a baby if there's pregnancy.
Right, true.
Now they both, through social conventions, i.e. family, would have to deal with the baby.
Yeah.
But if you weaken those social conventions, then he doesn't have to deal with the baby. You can create escape clauses like abortion, like divorce, or no fault divorce. And you could say, well, why even get married? Let's totally dissolve all the reinforcements that make sure that she's not left strapped with a child and all the emotional and physiological ties that she feels, the bonding, the maternal instinct, all of that. She doesn't have to do that by herself. And we had a lot of social reinforcements in the past to protect that, so that that's a good thing and not just a burden. But if the goal is to be as sexually casual and non-committed as possible, then pregnancy becomes a bad thing. And what does that do for womanhood overall? Well, it now says the most obvious distinctive that separates women from men is now a liability.
Yeah.
And that's not very pro-woman if you can step back and think about it in context. So I think the social, emotional, relational, psychological aspects that are more of an average between women and men, while those are different from men and women overall, they're not unconnected from the more demonstrable, harder objective differences that are to be found in biology. And you still don't have even a third gender, because I say gender in the classic sense of sex. I'm not talking about sense.
Right. Back when I was defending the definition of marriage, I would oftentimes get some students to say, why do you care? Why do you care about this? You know, what does it affect you? Why do you care? And I would say, well, why do you care that I care? I mean, my guess is it's probably for the same reason that I care.
That's a good point.
And that reason is it's an important topic.
Yeah.
I don't think they expect to use some kind of a rhetorical device to shame me into having their same position.
Yeah.
Which not caring is effectively having the same position. But I tell you what I care about, why I care about this.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't really matter to me unless it starts affecting kids in a way that's really harmful, and we're changing public policy about it. Then I start paying attention. Or even social conventions, like when folks share their pronouns, which is fine. I don't mind that at all. If you feel like you need to tell me how I'm supposed to refer to you in the third person as if I don't know, that's not me that's limited. That seems to be you that's limited, because that's the first time in history that anybody ever felt like they had to do that before and pretend like we don't know what these terms mean. But when someone says that I need to use a term that seems like the non-appropriate term for me to use, like a third personal pronoun that's inappropriate, that feels manipulative to me. And then that's what makes me care. And the truth is, I mean, like when you're talking about, like, X's and Y chromosomes and stuff,
Yeah.
people giving birth. I don't really take myself to know what people's chromosomes are, because for most of human history, that's not really, it wasn't really an item of knowledge. I mean, it might turn out that that's all true, but I think of
But
it much more commonsensical. I think you appear to be a man to me, and that's what I go by. I don't go by genitals because I don't check. That would be a crime, and that would be
yeah,
in public. That's a crime.
thanks, by the
That's
way,
not
for
what people did. People
the
didn't
improvement. Yeah.
check like that, and I think you know
Yeah.
at least not outside of your close family. If there's circumcision, that's one thing, because that's a tradition that goes way back in the
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian tradition. But like, I mean, it's it's something that you appear to be a man, and so there, when I talk about you when you're not there, I use the word he. um
Well,
I
to
don't,
speak to that,
that's simple as that. It's not that there's any kind of genetics involved or anything, because
I've
sometimes
come,
I might not be able to tell. Like if you turn your back and the angle, I can't quite tell, then I might use like a different pronoun, like they, which that's very common in English, to use the pronoun they when you don't know. Like, let's say there's a couple different ways people use they. Um, it's usually when you don't know the gender,
Mhm.
not saying that it's subjective. It's just, I don't know it yet.
Yeah,
Like, so for example, if I'm reporting a crime and I can just see there's a human being out there, maybe vandalizing or something like that, I might say, yeah, they have spray paint, they are wearing a hoodie,
yeah,
uh, and I'm using they, not because they shouted out up to me, my pronouns are they, them.
yeah,
And you disrespect me if you don't. It's not
yeah.
that it's not that my concern is to be respectful to this criminal. um, that's not why I use pronouns. I mean, I don't really respect Hitler, but it's never occurred to me to call Hitler a she, because I'm going to get back at Hitler,
Yeah.
because no, I mean, it's just, it's about accuracy. It's not about respect.
There's
And so I
something.
just use they, and if it appears to me that the person is a man, I will say he.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I might not know how many there are. It might be there's two of them, and that's why I say they. But usually that's the only reason, besides like babies. Ironically, when talking about abortion, we use sometimes the word it to refer to a baby. And I don't like this about how we do this. Um,
So there's two things that I want to
what are
share
you
to
going to
what you.
name it? What are you going to name it, John? What are you going to name it? And if I say, well, I'm going to name him John, I don't continue to use the word it.
Yeah.
It would be inappropriate for me to say its name is John. And
Can I
let
say
me
something
hold
before I
it.
lose it?
Let me
I mean,
let me hold it.
so there's two really important things that you mentioned that I have to comment on.
Okay.
One, there's only two sex gametes. There's sperm and egg. Until you can come up with a third one, there's not another sex. So when folks try to make it out like there's third or there's no binary, that is not an innocuous um, hypothesis. It's a very intentional hypothesis that where people coming from a framework where they tend to see all binaries as oppressive, as the powerful versus the powerless or the less powerful, and they're oppressing. So in the male female binary, it's assumed men are the powerful, women are the powerless, and we need to break down that binary so it's not this hegemony of the haves versus the have-nots. And that's one of the intentional efforts to queerify gender, is to break down all binaries so that you have a more egalitarian landscape where everything is really a matter of equals. Now, I don't think that ideology actually works. I don't think that's how nature's arranged. But there's elements of truth and goodness that I think they're aiming at, which are important to point out. But as long as there's only two sex gametes, there's only two sexes, i.e., two biological genders. And until someone can come up with a third one, then we're still dealing with a gender binary, naturally speaking. And that I think is a way to get around the genetics question, because there is intersex conditions, XYY, YY but presents as XY, those kinds of things.
Hold on, what's intersex? How's that different?
Intersex is a condition, a set of conditions that affects something like 1 or less than 1% of the population, and refers to either genetic abnormalities that are not the conventional male-female genetic prototypes, or it can also include physiological abnormalities where men and women present with some combination of both sex organs or related internal anatomy. It's usually treated like this mic drop moment to prove that the gender binary doesn't exist, but intersex doesn't create a third gamete. What you often have is someone with, say, a low-grade intersex condition where they can still reproduce, and if they're acting as the male member, then they're biological male, but they have a physiological condition. Like I've got asthma. Some people have diabetes. Some people have different conditions, and this is one of those kinds of conditions that happens to affect the sex hormones, but it's still a male or it's still a female, because that person can produce a baby, and this person can ejaculate but not produce a baby. So you still have those things. Some folks are not able to, they're sterile because of their intersex condition. And what might be surprising to most people is that national levels of intersex support organizations overwhelmingly favor the gender binary. It doesn't do them any good to treat their condition like it proves there's some third or more genders, because the condition usually has or often has medical side effects that need to be treated. And if folks are telling you, you don't need treatment, you're healthy. No, I think I need hormone supplements because my puberty is going to go wonky, and I'm going to have really weird side effects if I don't. And so if you treat unhealthy as healthy, then that starts to become a medical issue, and the ideology then becomes dangerous. So intersex conditions don't disprove the gender binary. The gametes still give us a ground level biological argument that there's only two genders, biological genders. Now, to speak to something else you said, I think it's important to look closely whenever someone's trying to ambiguate, when someone's trying to make things blurry, because the general motivation for blurring things is because you're trying to hide something. Guys will throw a smoke grenade if they're trying to hide their troop movements. They're going to go around a corner and they don't want to be shot at, so they throw a smoke grenade. If you're trying to make a tactical movement in culture and society and in media, then the smoke grenade is ambiguating language to use terms that are harder to pinpoint. Or that everybody thinks they know what it means, but you're using it in a different way on purpose, so that you can sneak something in. So whenever people are using language in non-traditional or potentially propagandist ways, look closer, because there's probably some prestidigitation they're trying to pull on you. There's some sleight of hand. Language really, really matters. And the pronouns thing, yeah. I don't think it matters terribly much in itself. I think what matters about it is it's the smoke grenade. What's going on behind the scenes with the pronouns? And if someone's asking me to call him a her, is that honest?
So it sounds like it's manipulation to me, because it's just it's an odd usage, because I've never managed how people talk about me behind my back. The third personal pronoun is always face to face. The pronoun is you, right? Which is gender neutral. Or it's I or me if I'm referring to myself. Those are pronouns. But the word you is also spelled exactly the same if it's plural.
Yeah.
Now, I
It's an
mean,
unfortunate ambiguity of English.
he and she, those are terms that are up to the speaker, depending on whether the speaker thinks the person referred to is male or female. That's always how it's been in any language. And I mean, I've heard that some languages don't have pronouns. I don't know if Latin does. Does Latin have pronouns? I'm not sure.
You don't have
Does it
to
have
use
he
them
or she?
as intensively as we do in English, but you can fix it into the morphology. So you have a
It's in the
word.
morphology, yeah.
Yeah. But they also have separate pronouns if you want to over clarify.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
because sometimes the morphology could be ambiguous, and adding that pronoun lets you know, oh, this is referring to that masculine, not this other masculine thing mentioned before it.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
you can still have, well, like in Spanish, you can have grammatical gender, and it doesn't say anything about biological gender.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I don't, I mean, sometimes people overcomplicate this stuff, and to me, the third personal pronoun management is odd, because that's typically not how pronouns work when you're dealing with third personal pronouns. It's not the person referred to managing it. It's how it appears to the person speaking, and it's up to them which word to use based on how it appears to them. And so it sounds like the person being referred to wants to manage that. Like, I appear to you this way.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, I don't, that's not how you appear to me.
Yeah.
So are you telling me that you have to appear to me? I'm sorry. What are you saying exactly? Are you saying I have to see something I don't see?
Yeah.
That sounds like manipulation to me.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. How you distinguish the third person, and how we don't have control over how people talk about us
Yeah.
behind our backs, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what the third person category is for.
And it's
not
never been about respect. It's
any
been about
dialogue.
it's been about accuracy. I don't know if you've ever seen this show. It's called Billions. Have you ever seen this show? It's on
No.
Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime. It's called Billions, and it's a it's it's okay. I mean, there's some things I like about it. There's some things I don't like about it. One of the things that I find a bit false about it is I think it takes itself to be a realistic show. Realistic meaning very believable,
Mhm.
not like science fiction or whatever.
Yeah.
And they have a character in the show that tells people to call her they them, and it's
Mhm.
clearly a female. It's
Yeah.
clearly a woman, and every character on the show, no matter how they relate to this individual, uses the they them pronoun,
Mhm.
and it feels very false to me.
Yeah.
um and it's the context is a competitive, uh bloodthirsty, otherwise quite totally pagan and Darwinistic kind of kill or be killed kind of Wall Street ish
Yeah.
capital uh, management type of a show. And it
Yeah.
just seems to be false that people in New York all use the same odd pronoun when
Yeah.
it's not. She doesn't look
It's not
like
a
a
Hollywood
them.
dinner party. It's not a Hollywood dinner party. It's New York.
It feels really forced. Like, look at us being good examples here for Hollywood and for people across America, and it
Well,
just feels like a project, like the audience is some kind of project or something. They're trying
that
to.
Rod Dreher book, "Live Not by Lies," where he's quoting a Alexander Solzhenitsyn speech as when you're facing a totalitarian or some other kind of tyrannical force,
Yeah.
and they're controlling so much that your options are extremely limited. What
Yeah.
advice do you give people as they're trying to find a way to move forward and carve out some way to still be faithful to their God? And he says, live not by lies. And if someone's telling me
Yeah.
that I need to call them by a gender reference that they've already revealed is not their biological gender. Oftentimes folks say, I was born a man, but I identify as a woman. Um, or they, them, if once you've come out as an individual and not a multiple personality conflation, and you let us know, to your point earlier, whether you were born male or female, or that's what you were before you came out of the closet, or whatever the reference is. I can't call you a plural. You're not a plural. Even if you're demon possessed, you are the one I'm talking about, not whatever demon's possessing you. You might
Right.
have multiple personalities, but I'm talking to that individual,
Right.
not to the different schisms that they may undergo.
Yeah.
You're an individual, and I have to use a singular now that I know which gender describes your biology. And so I can find ways around it, because I'm not trying to hurt people's feelings. I'm not trying to start an argument with every reference to a person in the third person. But there are ways around it, like using their proper name as
Right.
much as possible, or pointing,
Right.
hey, this person over here was saying such and such. And I didn't have to say he, she, they, them. But finding ways to try to respect and honor people, because sometimes it is tied in with some real ideological confusion or baggage, and frankly, there's a whole burgeoning mental health crisis that is set to explode any time now, as folks realize that this kind of individualism, emotivism, and the effects of social media in many ways have left us very immature and unprepared for the harsh realities of the world. And as we get into the workplace, and as kids are growing up and realizing, oh, that stint that I had in 8th grade where I took puberty blockers and then I quit in 9th grade, that may have some side effects. There are consequences to these types of actions, and I think a lot of them are going to be mental health issues. So with that said, we should be trying to find ways to honor and respect people, even when we can't lie about them or to them. Honor and respect them, because you never
when we feel a little bit disrespected by the manipulation that we sense. Because actually, that's actually the disrespectful thing, is to manipulate somebody.
Yeah.
Into
You never
to
quite know
saying
what
something they think is false.
Yeah.
That's actually disrespectful.
Yeah, that soft totalitarianism, the more it squeezes, there's a lot of liberty-minded Americans who are going to have to figure out what degree of their focus on freedom and liberty and individual autonomy, how much of that is some kind of Americanized ideology, and how much of it is a God-given yearning for freedom, to breathe free air. And somewhere in that balance, I think, is where we find a way going forward, because there is a way. And I vote conservative. I'm a social conservative. I vote pro-life. I love me some American Eagles, some Chuck Norris, some good action movies. I'm very stereotypical.
What do you mean by the term conservative?
Well,
like
let me
Ku
get to
Klux
my
Klan,
point.
or
Let me get
you're
to
for
my
slavery?
point. Let me get to my point in just a second. I am in many ways a pretty stereotypical, self-identified conservative. That said, it's very easy to make America and American nationalism an ideology, because we're remarkably clever and innovative in our means of ideology. I'm sorry, in our means of idolatry. We can make all sorts of things into idols. We can make our theology into an idol, forgetting God for the sake of our thoughts about God. And we can make the whatever American Christian history there is, we can make that our idol instead of making God our proper object of worship. Now, when I say conservative, I mean I want to conserve the better parts of culture, and I take special interest in seeing that our policy and governmental approach takes special care to bolster and protect the integrity of American families, traditional families. Yeah,
All right.
I'm not a Georgian monarch or a monarchist or a or KKK or anything like that. There, I'm sure many folks who identify along those lines would consider themselves conservative, but they're trying to conserve different things than I think the God-fearing, Jesus-loving, family-minded person's trying to conserve in our current cultural context.
Yeah. Yeah. I stopped using that term a long time ago, liberal versus conservative. People still use it of me, but I because I don't know what it means when people say it, because I'm constantly around people that don't really know the history of the Republican Party or the history of the Democratic Party. And I find that they want to avoid those terms, and they're actually they're more clear terms, I think. But there's a lot of folks that like these other terms, and especially liberal. I mean, liberal's been, I don't know, kind of replaced by progressive, I think. Yeah. These are all loaded terms. You just have to be careful. Just like, the other terms, you have to be careful. And I love that about philosophy, is constantly paying attention to terms, wanting to be able to drill down and make sure we're using the term correctly and same way. And now, if you could go back knowing everything you know now, would you go back through all that schooling and do it over again?
Yeah, I might pick different schools.
Oh, okay.
I was going
But
through
you would
it
still
with,
do a PhD? You would go all the way through?
yeah.
I mean,
And
that's a lot
that's
of work. It's a lot of suffering.
well, I gotta say, I did develop a minor passion and well-seasoned understanding of the problem of evil and the problem of suffering through my graduate experience. Uh, so,
Okay.
yeah, I would say I'd do it again. But here's the thing: I feel like the academic calling, while it's kind of a unique application of our intellectual duties as Christians,
Mm.
I don't think it's that exceptional. I think
Wow.
Christians have a broad redemptive role in society, and we don't really have permission from God to say, well, university, just forget about them. Just you focus on doing this. Now, individuals will have different callings. Not everybody should go into academia. I'm not saying that. But the church, capital C, has a duty to be a redemptive influence across culture, and that especially includes these gateways of leadership and influence in society that we call the university.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm passionate about academics, but on top of that, the Bible says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And unfortunately, in today's nomenclature, we tend to treat the mind like it's at odds with the heart. Like, if I want a strong mind, I'm going to have to starve the heart.
Very
If I want to
very
feed my heart,
common.
I'm going to have to starve the mind.
Yeah. Very common.
It's not a zero sum. These are both meant to work best together,
Got
and
to integrate them. Yeah.
all of it is a mode, is means for loving God. If you're not
Amen.
using your mind in a God honoring way, then that's kind of not loving God as you should.
Amen. That's a wonderful little sermon. I love that. Yeah, that's a great theme. That's a great theme. Loving God with all your heart and mind go together. And I think it's wonderful. You're a wonderful example of someone who bridges that and shows that they're meant to be integrated.
Thank you.
And that's just how you are. You're over
Yeah,
there making stuff over at Pella, and you have a PhD, and you've studied all these amazing things, and you have all this amazing knowledge, and you're a guy. You're just a guy. You're a normal guy. And you're
I
like, let's
love.
go watch a
Oh,
movie. Let's listen to some music.
yeah,
Put together some windows.
yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
there's a kind of elitism that often gets associated with academia and the intellectual life, and I think that
yeah.
is artificial.
Hmm.
That's a kind of egoism, competition spirit where folks are trying to prove that they're better than. And
Yeah.
for me to be better than means someone else has to be less than. How about instead, we're all trying to love God as comprehensively and as constantly as possible.
Mm.
And if we're leaving out whole dimensions of the human experience and say, oh, God doesn't care about that, says who? God said he cares
Wow.
about it. Why do you think God's wrong about saying he cares about how you use your mind?
Wow.
Yeah.
Dallas Willard is famous for saying that Jesus Christ was the smartest man who ever lived.
Hmm.
And the thing that gets me about that is he was a regular guy. He was a carpenter. There was
Fished.
apparently nothing special about him that that he I mean he well, let me be clear here.
I know what you're
He
saying.
didn't when I say apparently, I mean to everybody living there before he started his ministry, beyond a very small set of people, like for example his parents, who knew who he really was.
Yeah.
Obviously, he lived a normal life, and
Mhm.
he didn't have huge crowds around him, his family, before
Yeah.
he started his public ministry. And that's why when he started his public ministry, a shift occurred. Then
Mhm.
he was a public figure, more of a public figure, and even then he had a very limited audience. He wasn't on the Roman Empire Twitter with followers as far as Spain on the one hand and maybe England on the other hand, and um, uh, certainly no further than just miles away from where he lived. And he was a normal guy, and he was the smartest man who ever lived. And so
Mhm.
obviously he was, he's the one that said, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind.
Mhm.
And he was God. so
Yeah.
so it's like it what I love about talking to you, John, is you you seem very much like Christ, I think. I think
Oh,
you feel
that
like,
is the highest compliment. Thank you.
yeah, you're a man's man, and you want to
Beard.
be as integrated as possible. So I think that any college or seminary should be honored to have you on staff if you ever
I
want to
think
go
so
back.
too.
Yeah,
That would You should write them a note.
I will. Well, I'll throw this up on YouTube, and if all the political party that runs YouTube and doesn't take it down because it was too offensive to them,
Yeah.
not to anybody else, but to them and their goals, then maybe it will be evident to somebody who
Yeah.
can offer you a well-paying job and
Yeah.
provide
Well,
well for your lovely wife.
God's
So
taking care of us, and I
it's
have come
awesome.
to see in these seasons outside of the academic sphere,
Mhm.
um, that there's a lot to be learned in the desert. You
Mm.
know, it's not what you thought you needed to know, but it is often those kinds of lessons that you won't learn any other way. In places outside of your comfort zone, outside of where your training, your experience, the places where you're confident and you're skilled. Often it's outside of those places that um, you interact with God at a different level because you can't really rely on your competence and your reputation and your expertise. you have to rely on him because it's hard getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to shovel snow for a 5 a.m. job and then rush home after 10 hours and go to bed. I mean, and I even laugh at myself because I'm complaining because of these first world problems. And I think about a generation ago, there are folks that would love to have that. And, same
Yeah.
kinds of folks that built their own log cabin with their bare hands and laughed at the weather and
Yeah.
tried to raise their kids up to be hardier and more capable. And I'm here whining
See,
because
it's
I'm
all
in
relative, John. It's all, you see, you just proved
yeah,
how truth is relative. You just proved it. Just kidding. I'm kidding.
thing like that.
Do you have coffee in the morning?
Oh yeah.
So you got that
Yeah.
coffee while you're doing the shoveling? Do you guys have snow right now?
Not right now, but we're close. It was like 70 degrees earlier this week, midday, and just yesterday it started to drop down close to freezing. And I think right now it's below freezing, but we'll
Whoa.
routinely get a
My
couple.
gosh.
We'll get, I don't know, 5 or 6 snows in the course of the winter, and for at least a month there it'll stay below freezing so that when it snows it stays there. So you have to shovel it out of the way so that when the next snow comes in, it doesn't compact it and freeze it even
Gotcha.
more solid.
Okay.
There's a whole philosophy of how to handle snow that I had to learn when I moved from
Yeah.
Texas to Pella.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. I grew up in Colorado, so I can kind of maybe possibly imagine some of that.
I
Well,
was actually
John,
born here. Yeah.
you were born in Denver?
And I spent some time in Estes Park and Aspen. I love Colorado.
Yeah, I do too. I miss it. I miss how it used to be. I don't miss how it is now.
I'm probably the same way. Yeah.
Well, Dr. John Ferrer, thank you for your time today. I
For having me.
loved just hanging out with you and having a conversation.
Yeah, you're one cool dude.
Well, thank you. I got this sweater on, so I'm trying to keep warm. Okay, take care, John.
Take care.